Hello, and welcome to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Let's unpack the relationships that we encounter in our daily lives and learn about what makes them tick. And now your host for Red Rock Relationships, Dr. James B. Stein.
All right, folks, we're here. We made it through a full season of Red Rock Relationships. Well, not yet. We have one last episode to do. So I want to start by thanking everybody who I've had on over the last 11 and now 12 episodes. We've had a lot of fun talking about relationships, and we're going to do it one last time before we break. But then we should be back in the spring semester to talk about even more stuff. And I'm very excited to close out our season talking about one of, in my opinion, the most important elements of close relationships, especially when it comes to things like dating relationships, friends with benefits relationships, and marriages, which we've spent a lot of time talking about on this show. Today, we're going to be talking about consent. And to join me and help me discuss those very important issues is Dr. Lori Bednarczyk, who has advanced expertise in that very topic. So, Lori, thank you so much for joining us.
I could not be more ecstatic to be here, James. It's amazing to see you.
You too, and for those listening, Lori is yet another product of Arizona State University. That trend will not stop at season 2. I've already got some folks lined up who are part of that program, so get used to hearing some Sun Devils talk about relationships.
I mean, I'd like to think that just, it's a great commercial for Arizona State, but also, like, it just shows how cool your friends are.
Yeah, well, we all do similar things, and, I've told stories about other folks at ASU on here, and Lori, you are the person who, when I went to go visit Arizona State University to see if I wanted to pursue my PhD there, you are the person who was nice enough to house me in your apartment, and I got to pet your dog, and we had a good time that evening meeting many of the people who have been on this show. So it's funny how things work like that. But why don't we start off the way that we always start off? Can you tell us a little bit about your academic history, where you came from, and how you find yourself now going all around the country educating people about consent?
Sure. So I'm going to take 1 second to just congratulate you on an amazing season. I've been following this the whole time because, of course, you have everybody that I know on, and so it's been so exciting. So I did not have any champagne to cheers you. All I had open was this is all that was left in the bottle of wine that I had from the week that we've had. And so I just want to cheers you and congratulate you on an amazing season and inviting all of us on and getting this information out to the students, because that's really amazing. So I'm gonna go ahead and
I'll hold up a cup of coffee to that, and I don't want to no product placement. We're not sponsored by anyone.
I also have coffee.
Oh, wow, mixing wine and coffee. This should make for a great episode.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Mixing the stimulants and the depressants are not a good combination.
Mm-hmm.
Let me talk about, so where did I come from? So I have a very, very eclectic background. So I'm trying to think of everybody that you've had on the show. I probably have a slightly different background than a lot of people. My academic background is University of Maryland. I went to University of Maryland on a swimming scholarship and had no idea what I wanted to do. Loved writing and reading, so did English. Stayed in school, went and got my master's in public health, finished that back in 2007, and then moved out to San Diego, California, which is where I'm coming from right now, and worked at San Diego State as a health educator for a number of years, which is where my revelations on sexual consent communication kind of really came to fruition, and then returned to school at Arizona State to pursue the PhD. I was much older than a lot of the students who were there. Most people kind of go straight through, so I had some work experience before I came through, and now I'm like living my best life in San Diego. I live at the beach. I teach at a number of different universities, which is the most amazing thing that I can ask to do. And then I also do professional speaking. So I speak all over the country to college students, to student athletes, fraternity sororities, to professional athletes, to corporations. And I'm spreading this message about healthy sexual communication and consent.
Yeah, that's a great summary. So why don't we just dive into it? I think that when people think about what it means to give consent, there's a lot of miscommunication, and there's a lot of different definitions that we wrap our heads around.
Yeah.
How do you, when you speak to folks or when you teach a class, how do you define the term consent?
Great question. So I think what's important to think about here is the fact that a lot of us have learned about consent within the confines of this kind of sexual assault prevention, no means no kind of focus, right? So and I always did that too, because I was doing education at San Diego State. I was working with, high risk men, which we usually refer to fraternities, athletes, as higher risk for a number of reasons, which I'm not going to get into, but we could if we wanted to. And it was all within the confines of this class that was teaching them to go out onto campus and teach other men about preventing sexual violence, which I was one of the most amazing experiences in the world. But whenever we would get to the conversation about consent, immediately the temperature in the room would change, in the sense that these men would feel very uncomfortable. It was, I have to have my partner sign something. It has to be this, formal thing. And I'm like, listen, like, how do you tell another person that you want to have sex or engage in any sexual activity for that matter? And they're like, oh, well, I say this, this, and this, and this. And then I'm like, well, how do you know if the person that you're with is interested in doing sexual things with you? And they're like, oh, well, they do this, this, and this. I'm like, that is all consent communication. And so I started kind of looking at consent in a different context, in the sense that if we think about the sexual activity and the sex that's going on in our world, it's predominantly consensual. And so there's a lot that we can learn from people who are doing this in the way that they should be. So to define it, I define it as a yes means yes, this affirmative sexual consent, which a lot of people are adopting. Really, the kind of premise of this is that it's the responsibility of the person who's initiating any sort of sexual activity to obtain that consent. Man, woman, non-binary. This focuses on giving agency to all partners during sexual activity. It's enthusiastic, so both people or all people involved are excited about and into what you are engaging in. And each person that's involved has just as much responsibility to provide this kind of continuous enthusiastic consent as they do to obtain it from their partner.
Yeah, I like that. And I think you touched on all the key words on our Instagram. We posted a fun little image of, and I'm looking at it right now, a little package of fries, and it says, I love fries. And fries is, of course, an acronym that stands for freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, specific. And so these are sort of the basic tenets of the new way of understanding consent. I want to spend some time focusing on that a little bit more. Like you said, the old guard, right? The old guard is focused on this idea of no means no. And I think that that's problematic for a couple of reasons. One, it places the responsibility on the person receiving touch or receiving the action, okay? And then second, it absolves the initiator, like you said, it absolves the initiator of responsibility and allows them to say something along the lines of, well, I didn't know that my partner did not want this. And so while that might be an explanation, it is not an excuse. And so I think shifting from no means no to yes means yes does a really good job of that. So I wonder if we can kind of unpack those two elements in talking about the difference between no means no versus yes means yes. Why is it so important to make that switch?
What I think that is the most important, at least in my opinion, and from my experience, because I always like to talk from experience, is that I think that from my experience being in rooms with college students or even just interacting with my friends and talking about this issue, as soon as we start bringing up this idea of somebody not being interested in sex, or sexual activity, us, misinterpreting signs, it's very uncomfortable to think about. And I think that those conversations need to happen for sure. I just think that when we talk about yes means yes, not only are we appealing to a larger number of people, because people who are like, I would never commit sexual assault or I would never have sex with somebody without their consent. Mm-hmm. We're appealing to them because we're encouraging healthier, more active sexual communication with partner or partners. And then for sexual assault prevention programming, we're really focusing on the prevention piece, right? So we're not just focusing on this, if your partner says no, you should stop. And that's a great message, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that most students, particularly because I know that we're really appealing to students here, most students have heard it, they know it, and they're like, got it, now what? So what yes means yes really provides is a roadmap of how we go about speaking to our partner throughout the relationship. I really think that not only are we talking about how do we do this in a sexual situation, but how do we continue, bringing up boundaries and bringing up issues with our partner that are tough. So we're kind of starting the conversation.
Right.
I don't know if that answers the question.
No, that perfectly answers the question. And I want to piggyback on that because there is really interesting research about relationship satisfaction and sexual satisfaction. And what those data show us is that sexual satisfaction is a large predictor of relationship satisfaction. So the more satisfied you are with your bedroom life, the more satisfied you're going to be in your relationship. Now, there's other research that shows that, obviously communicating about sex improves our sexual satisfaction, but specifically, telling our partner what we like is great. The most influential thing, however, is when we talk about the things that we don't like with our partner. And that also happens to be the topic that is talked about least in the bedroom. So the conversation that needs to be had more than any other is the one that we're having the least. And I think about some of the folks, especially out here in the southwest portion of the United States and Utah specifically, where sex is a very taboo topic and it's not to be discussed. And it's not necessarily not to be had, but it's definitely not to be talked about. And so I think switching from this yes means yes means putting that responsibility and that onus on ourselves to ask these questions of our partner. But I also think that there's another step that I want to get into right here. I did a little bit of research for this episode, and one thing I found very interesting is that according to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, self-reports of sexual assault and rape have nearly doubled over the last couple of years. I have my speculations as to why this might be, but then there's some other information. If you couple it with, so the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network shows us that only about 20% of rapes occur by a stranger, and that 1 in 3 are done by a spouse or a boyfriend or a girlfriend. So, with this information in hand, this kind of reinforces what you were saying about the initiator being the one who's responsible. So what things can we ask ourselves as we try to, embark on a sexual adventure with our partner? How can we make sure, on the individual level that we're doing things that our partner wants us to do and that we're not overstepping boundaries?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I love is that you just name dropped some really great resources. So for the listeners, I I didn't even give those to you. So kudos to you. Those are really, really great resources for people to use to learn more about sexual violence prevention, to find reliable facts and statistics about what we're talking about today. So I do want to thank you for doing that research, and not that I would doubt that you could. I I also want to point out as well that when we are, how do I say this? So you brought up a really interesting statistic, and you talked about how this is happening between people who know each other.
Yes.
And that means that there is a component here that's missing. And I I was so I'm sorry, I'm doing what I didn't do before, but when we are doing public speaking, so I'm going to relate this to probably things that students can understand. So when we are learning about public speaking and we're learning about audience analysis, right? The whole idea is that when we are public speaking, we're like thinking about ourselves, and we're like, what do I want to say? What do they think about me? What's going on? I need to be like this. I need to do this. I'm nervous. I'm shaking. They're judging me. But we always tell our students during public speaking, like, think about your audience. What do they want? What are they interested in hearing? And I think that that same thing can parallel over, or kind of cross over into this idea of communicating with our partner about sexual consent, is that a lot of times we're so afraid of rejection or being judged that we're focusing more on that, which prevents us from asking or saying or checking in, instead of saying, what would my partner want?
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to what would my partner want, but I think in this time, in this world that we're living in right now, we're talking a lot about empathetic communication, and this idea of putting yourself in other people's shoes, and kind of understanding their experience. And I think doing that with your partner too, right? Thinking about, what are they feeling? What would I want my partner to say to me, which can help guide those conversations. And yeah, I don't know if that.
No, that's great, because it gives you agency as the actor, and it gives you almost an excuse, right? Almost an excuse to say, okay, what do I want out of this interaction? What does my partner want out of this interaction? And how can I make sure that these are indeed the things that my partner wants from me? When I teach like upper division relational communication classes, because it's a little too heavy of a conversation for like an intro course. But when we teach the upper level classes, one of the things I always talk about with my students is I make them say these things out loud, and I say, like, what sort of questions do you ask your partner about sex? And they're like, oh, we don't. But there are very basic things that we can do. Asking questions like, do you like this? Or how does this feel? Or do you like when I do that? Or, I think next season we're going to try and have an episode about pillow talk. Pillow talk is one of the best ways in which partners, for those who don't know, pillow talk is post-coital talk. I had to sneak the word coitus in there.
I'm sorry, you just used the word coital. That's
funny. I had to sneak the word coitus in there. I had to. After a sexual interaction has occurred, often partners are laying in bed or on couch or on floor together and cuddling. For more on cuddling, listen to Dr. Van Raalte's episode. And those conversations, those pillow talk conversations, are a great opportunity for us to share things like, I really loved when this happened, or I really wasn't crazy about when that happened. So those are the times to ask, and it's not as awkward as you might think. Last thing that I wanted to get to in our final minutes here, the data show us that the unbelievably vast majority of sexual perpetrators in this country and around the world are men. There are some reasons that we just don't have the time to get into regarding all of that. However, did we disconnect? I think you're back. Oh. You're back. No worries.
I'm back.
So we were talking about the issues that men face being the primary perpetrators of these actions, and one of the biggest things is that there are indeed a lot of men who are, to their credit, going out of their way to educate themselves about these issues, and then there are some who are not. So the final question I have for you is, what are some ways that you encourage men to share all this information with other men? How do we get them to almost self-police, for lack of a better term?
That's a great question. So, and a hard one and a complicated one, but I'm going to do my best to answer it succinctly because I know we don't have much time. I think that men 100% need to. Actually, let me start with masculinity. I think that masculinity has a lot to do with it. I think gender socialization has a lot to do with it. We socialize men to be men, be aggressive, go out, sexual conquests, all of these things, right? And what I love is we are seeing a shift in that, and we are seeing that gender is being talked about on more of a continuum where men and women both have masculine and feminine qualities that they express, and that expressing emotion and communicating is maybe a feminine quality, but in our world right now, like, why are we looking at feminine qualities as less than or bad, right? And so I think that there's a lot of men who want to speak up, but are feeling that kind of that fight between, I'm supposed to be doing this, but I know I should be doing this, and I want to do this, right? So there's a lot of things going on there. And I want to talk to the men. I want to say, whatever you're feeling in terms of respecting women, respecting your partner in general, no matter what gender or sex they are, speaking to that person with respect and checking in is always the right thing to do. And if your partner has an adverse reaction to that and says, well, I just expect you to do it, or why are you checking in? I really think you should step back and be like, why am I hanging out with this person? And do I really want to engage in sexual activity with this person? Right. So I do think that men need to step back and say, I need to start taking, my boundaries and my voice seriously, and holding my partner to the respect that I'm giving them, and realize, and that's the best thing about Yes Means Yes, is that it's no longer looking at somebody asks and somebody says yes. It's now looking at consent as a partnership, and looking at consent as something that is ongoing throughout your sexual experience. So, the other thing too that I want to get my tagline in, and before we leave here today, is I also do want to say that no is a complete sentence. And so I know we're talking a lot about yes, but I do want to say that for men, for women, for whoever is communicating this, at any point, if you want to say no, why, oh, come on, anything that happens, like, no is a complete sentence, and you have every agency to say no. But it doesn't have to be a yes or a no. It can be something where it's like, I don't really want to do that thing, but what I want to do is this other thing, right? So it is kind of this, I'm going to age myself here, but it's that choose your own adventure books, right? You get to that end of the paragraph and you're like, do you want to do this or do you want to do this? And you're like, I'm going to do that. And then you through the book and then you're like, oh, I'm going to go back and try that again.
Right.
Like, what we...
Oh, Lori's cutting out again.
General, as well as...
We lost the last sentence, but that's okay. We're just about out of time. For the record, the kids are calling it Bandersnatch. That Black Mirror episode, Choose Your Own Adventure. Yeah, Bandersnatch.
Okay, I don't know that.
Well, what I always tell my male students is kind of like in the way that you need to lose your baseball game in order to act like you've been there. You need to be able to accept rejection, and it is okay for someone to say no to you. That's not an attack on your identity. You are allowed to hear no and accept no, and checking in is sexy, by the way. That is all the time. That's all the time that we have. Thank you so much, Lori, for joining us for this awesome conversation. Next season, we are going to be talking about uncertainty, self-identity, social support, and many, many other topics with some really, really smart people. So I'm really looking forward to what's in the future, and I thank you, as always. See you next semester.
You've been listening to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. If you'd like to be on the show or have questions for us, please send us an email to redrockrelationships@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Red Rock Relationships. Thank you again. And remember, it all begins with good communication. This has been a production from A Podcast Studio.